Also, before I forget, since I know sometimes people need to leave early, I'm going to drop a link in the chat, and this link is just for, if you are interested in continuing to learn more about this proposed rate. So I can reach out as we move forward in creating this or petitioning to create this. Welcome everyone to Research Beyond Academia, exploring alternative pathways for education researchers. So my name is Tiara Worsley, and I'm currently at Northern Virginia Community College. I've been a part of NARST since 2018, I believe was my first conference. And I've been able to kind of start with the graduate student committee, and now I'm moving into looking at creating this rig. And since there's not too many of us, this can be pretty informal. So if you do have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll have that open, or you can just stop me and ask a question. Okay, so to get started, why did I want to come up with this rig? So for most of us, we take this path where we start off wanting to do a doctoral program. And when we get in those programs, we take all our courses, we begin to get involved with research. And throughout that program, they're very heavily prepping us to go into a tenure track position. We're put on presentations, we're told we should publish, we're told to start networking, we go to conferences, everything is done to pretty much push us on this tenure track and make our CVs look really good. And then the fun part is we get on the job market. I remember the first time I saw the doc students in my program get on the job market, it looked a little terrifying. It looked fun, but it looked terrifying. And then when I was on the graduate student committee, one thing we noticed is that when the jobs would be posted, because we're in STEM education, when you would type that in, like STEM education jobs, sometimes it might send you to like stem cell research or something very hard sciences. So because of that, when I was co-chair, I started looking for science education and STEM education specific jobs. And as I was, pulling all these jobs in to post, I put them up on Twitter. At the time, it was Twitter. We'd put it in our newsletters. What I was noticing was there really weren't that many jobs coming out for the amount of people that I knew who were graduating, because our science education circle can be kind of small. Like, we know most of the people via the conferences, and like these articles have found, I was like, for it to be such a big deal to get a tenure track position, like the math just kind of isn't mathing. Like there's literally just not enough jobs for everyone to land a tenure track. And as I was kind of looking into it, I found this one article where, they say too many PhD graduates or too few academic job openings, the basic reproductive number in academia. And then I found this statistic where they said, according to NSF, only 3.5% of PhD graduates in science and engineering are in tenure track positions 3 years after graduation. And it's way more competitive for those in the social sciences. And, it's a very interesting market for a tenure track because the positions aren't usually created. It's more you're waiting for someone to retire, or some unfortunate circumstance may happen to someone who's already in that position. or someone just decides to like look for another job and so they leave because typically you have what, maybe 3 to 5 science professor positions at any given university. And so statistically, I was realizing, why is it such a big deal when we don't land a tenure track when the odds are already against us? So as I was on this journey, when I was in the doc program, I always felt this tension. And, coming into an education program and with my background, because I had not, you know, formally taught in classrooms, all my teaching has been informal. I didn't have a teaching license. I often kind of felt out of place or like, what do I really want to do while I'm here? And, one thing I really liked doing was research, getting into the projects, learning how to collect data, analyze it, all of those things. I was like, oh, I like this part of it. But I was also realizing there was a big tension around, what you want to do as far as your future. And I was beginning to realize throughout that whole doc process that, I kind of didn't want a tenure track position. I just didn't see myself in that type of position. And to clarify, it wasn't that I felt I couldn't do the job. I just didn't think it was the right job for me. So I kind of had this tension, I want to stay in research, but I kind of don't want to do a tenure track. And it was almost like, well, how do I continue? Because because I wanted a moment to kind of sit back, see what does it mean to be, a researcher full time. Yeah, sorry, I was reading the comments in the chat. Yeah, so it was kind of like this, if, when you're a student, usually you're limited to the 20 hours of doing research, but, as a full time, what does it mean when this is kind of all I'm doing? So I first went into a postdoc and I asked my advisor if she could make that position for me. So I was in a 2-year postdoc. And around that second year is when I started my job market search. And it was very daunting because you're not looking for the jobs that everyone else in your circle is looking for. So they're not seeing what you're seeing. And then two, which my advisor was very supportive of what I wanted to do. But again, she's a tenure track professor. And while she did give me some contacts of people who may be good to talk to, even she was kind of at a loss, like, yeah, I don't know, but here's some people to reach out to. So I did a lot of what I called informational interviews, where I would reach out to people, literally just ask them about their job, how were they doing research in their job, or what did it look like, and then asking them if they had 2 to 3 other people that they thought were good for me to talk to. And that's kind of how I began building my outside of academia network. And what I was learning, I call these my job market tensions, is I realized kind of knowing the opportunities available was really hard. It's hard to look for a job when you don't really know what you're looking for. And so really all I could start with was, I just want to do STEM education, but I don't know, is that a coordinator? Is that a manager? What does that look like? Understanding the possibilities. So, because we can kind of be in these silos of research, I didn't really understand the possibilities of doing research if you were not at a 4-year university. Do other people still get grants, or how does this work? Because, from my lens view, for what I know, everyone getting the grants is at the university. So how does it work when you're outside of that scope? Next, as I told you, I was kind of creating this new network. I was doing all these informational interviews. And, at one point, I think I said I shouldn't be working this hard just to know what kind of job I want. Like, I'm not even applying, I'm just trying to figure out what the jobs are. So creating this new network, like that was a toll. And then even asking myself, does this make sense? Like, why did I sign up for a PhD if I don't even want to go tenure track? Like, does it even make sense what I'm doing? But through all that, and it was a journey. And I think what kind of let me know it does make sense is the next NARST conference came up, and you've always got a few that are on the market, they're looking for jobs. And when I was talking with them, they were kind of like, oh yeah, I would also like to know about other jobs, but you know I just feel like I should securely go tenure track because one, that's what we know to do. And so a lot of navigating those tensions, and then two, when you saw, you know, um, I was going as a postdoc, and then when you talk to some professors, it almost felt like there was a shame around it. Like, well, why don't you want to be one of us? Like, why don't you want to get into our job field? And almost feeling like I had to apologize. Like, sorry, I just don't think it's for me. Or people taking it as, no, you can do the job. And me wanting to clarify, I don't feel unqualified. I just don't want to do it. Um, so there was just a lot of feelings in that second year. But what I was finding is there was a lot of alternative pathways that I just was not aware of. So one of those is educational institutions. So as I said at the beginning, like I'm currently at a community college, and I'm within that STEM education outreach type of office. And surprise to me, I'm still on grants. They're still doing research. It looks very different than what I'm used to, but it is there. There was also, looking at industry. There's research institutions. There's the private sector, government. I will disclaimer. I kind of wrote this out last year, like, oh, there's jobs in the government. There's federal level. There's state level. There's local level. There's like, because as I said, I didn't have that formal training. I hadn't worked in a school, so I thought, maybe a school doesn't need me, or maybe my expertise isn't as valued in this space. But then as I began to talk to more people, even that became more of a reality. Like, oh, maybe I could be helpful in, maybe a district office or state level office or departments of education across the states. And then also, there's nonprofits, there's museums, there's NGOs, there's really just a ton of options that I just wasn't aware of. And to even give a more specific example, um, I worked on a project with the Exploratorium in San Francisco. And then when I even heard about all the research they were doing, I was like blown away, like, wow, I just didn't even know this was possible unless I was at a university. So in this journey of finding a job, I was like kind of doing a lot of unlearning while continuing to learn, and just, kind of realizing, oh, sometimes you really do just have to forge your own pathway, kind of know what you want, but be open to what else people are sharing and what they're offering. And, also don't limit yourself, and, just be really open. So, one of the things that I realized again from working with NARST in the graduate student sector is, the more conversations I was having with students, you probably see me around the conference just smiling and talking to students all day long because that's my favorite part. Realizing there's this growing need among grad students for support as they navigate the career choices and the job searches, because it's just really hard, because we've trained, we've worked hard, we've like acquired this title of doctor and PhD at the end of our names. And then it's, we don't want to make $1 million a year, but we want something to show for it. So, even balancing, how much should I be making? Like, I don't know, just how does this add up? What's the difference? postdoc scholars, they're also exploring a range of options, including both academic and non-academic career paths. I was super thankful to my advisor that she just kind of let me figure it out as well, because I told her I was very unsure, but I knew I wanted to continue researching with her. But at the same time, figure out what the next steps were. And then I was also, once I got into this current position at the community college, I began to learn, again, at the time, NSF was showing increased interest in supporting research at community colleges, because when people think research, they think R1, and they don't usually think of community colleges. But there's opportunity for that. I even learned NSF has, a track just for community college research, and I just wasn't aware. And also learning that, educational organizations, they also serve as important research spaces as well. So these were the things I was kind of learning from my interactions with everyone as I was sharing my experience. And I see in the chat, someone said recognizing that you didn't want to be tenure track in itself was an achievement. Thank you. I felt like I had to come to terms with it. And also begin to let other people know that it's okay if we don't want to do that path. And it doesn't mean we don't believe in ourselves. It's just not what we want. But yeah, just learning and growing and sharing, and then sharing my experience at the conference. I could also see other people saying, oh, wow, I didn't even know that was possible. And so within that, that's where I started to see a need for this rig, because for NARST to be such the hub that it is, there's so much opportunity for research outside of this traditional four-year academic setting. Like, the interest is growing. I was also noticing that there was just less support when not following that tenure track path, leaving some students like confused, like, what am I supposed to do? Or, like I said, shame, because you don't want to, follow the path that everyone's doing. And again, I am not judging if you do choose to do tenure track. I still applied for a tenure track position on my job search because job security is what we're after. But, just kind of this, like, why isn't it your first choice? Or just feeling lost about the career choice. Because again, looking for a job is really hard. I don't think people talk about that process as much. And, just navigating it, especially when, all my academic friends are kind of on the same path. They've all applied for their positions at the same time, and they're following the process for tenure track. But when you're outside of that, you could get hired in a month. They may not get back to you for 2 months or 3 months. And, it was just very taxing, because we know that timeline of applying for tenure track. And now I was just kind of on a whatever timeline. So there is navigating that as well. And then also, I think we need this rig because of the challenges in identifying all career paths, just because there's limited discussion outside of the tenure track. When we're in our classes and we would have guest speakers, typically it's another professor from a different university. So I just kind of have a goal of broadening that scope, and also creating just a place where, anyone can come and just learn about what their options are. So some of my goals for the rig would be, again, kind of having this open discussion about non-traditional paths to research, strengthening research opportunities between traditional and non-traditional institutions, creating space for grad students, probably early career scholars, to explore their careers in science education research organizations, and also, increasing the visibility and collaboration among researchers within the NARST community, because, which I understand, NARST is very focused on the research aspect and more of that empirical rather than practical type of way. And so, making sure other people are represented so that we can, again, see the possibilities of what we can do. How would the rig benefit NARST? I think because NARST supports so much research and science teaching, I think it would cover this large umbrella of research that is kind of reinforced by the varying strands that we do have. Because also, like, now that I'm at a community college, I'm trying to figure out, where could the work I'm doing now fit? And, it's just a large umbrella. Also, I think it can open up the boundaries of who is traditionally included in research, because, we have our own rankings in academia. And I think just, this can help us become more of an inclusive environment and keep up with this shifting landscape of just who and how we engage in research. So to let you know how this process will look. So the first thing I would need to do is kind of create a petition. It would need to be signed by at least 10 NARST members. And, we'd need to have a description of chair selection, rotation of the administrative structure process. Would we just have a chair, co-chair, secretary, treasurer, what's going to be the administrative structure, as well as potential plans of action. And this would be due next month. I've started looking into how to set that up, but that would be the next step, which is why I'm having this webinar to kind of garner support, see how others feel about it. And then once the petition is created, it would go under review, where it would go to the research committee review, and then there would be a board decision. So again, here's a QR code to that interest form. I will also put it in the chat again. And basically the form is just kind of asking, where you are, what you're interested in seeing come out of this rig, if you would be interested in possibly being on the administrative team. I will probably reach out within the week to set up a meeting for those who are interested. So, we can get this petition going. I don't think the petition is too long, but still we would need to create the document, but I would definitely be reaching out. I dropped this link in the chat. Oh, I need to advance my slide. I'm gonna get one. So this is the presentation. I'm gonna say thank you, and then I'm gonna go back to, let's discuss. So I'm open, the floor is open. You can drop your questions in the chat or comments. One, how do you feel? Do you think this is a needed rig at NARST? What might be some of the challenges that you are experiencing in whatever stage you may be in? And, what might be some topics that you would like to see, you would like to directly see this potential rig addressed?